In this video, we're going to continue looking at this Cosmo Farmer and doing some positioning and layout. Actually, we've done all the positioning in the previous video, the badge, the submenu, the image, and its caption that's on top of it. So we've done some positioning already, and now we want to get into the actual layout. We want to turn this from a single column layout to a three-column layout, taking the news and putting that on the left side, the advertisements putting them on the right, and having the content here fill in the middle. Okay, and just as we did in previous slides, we want to look first of all at the way the HTML code is actually going to be written. In other words, what is the source order of all these elements? And then translate that into the layout as far as what needs to be moved and what doesn't need to be moved. We can see here, first of all, we have a wrapper that everything is just contained in. That's going to come first. Everything's still contained in that, so no change there. The banner comes next in its code. We're going to leave that alone too because the banner comes next. The main nav, which was that navigation in the black, if you remember correctly, that remains the same. And then the content wrapper that we talked about, we saw that anyway, we didn't really talk about it, but you saw it. That's going to remain the same place, but we're going to give that relative positioning. Why? Because we're going to need to move these two sidebars, the one that's got the news in it, the sidebar, and the one that's got the ads, to either side. So 6, the sidebar with the news, is going to be absolutely positioned, and 7 is going to be absolutely positioned as well. 5, the main content, will just flow where it's supposed to, but as we've said before, we will have to set margins on either side of it. And then 8, which comes last here, is going to be last on this side. So there's only a couple things that we need to move here. So we look at the HTML again. We're dealing with that main content. We've already taken care of the menu. That's up above. That stays in the place it's at. And it's this main part. Remember, I originally said it's the content wrapper. It has a section in it that is the ID main, has the main content. It then has another section with the ID of sidebar, and one last section that has the ID of adverts. Those are the advertisements. So this content wrapper is what's holding everything. That's what we need to give a relative positioning to. So in our style sheet for position and layout, we're going to add a selector for just the pound content wrapper. These are case sensitive, so make sure that you got it correctly. Lowercase c, uppercase w, is that the case? And yes, as you can see here, it is. The ID is lowercase c, uppercase w. So all we're going to do here is give this position, and that position is going to be relative. And once we have that one, then we can also do the pound sidebar. That's the selector that has all the news in it. That's the second section of the actual document itself. That's the one coming after the main content down here at the bottom. Again, the section that has all the news in it. We're going to give this position as well, but this position is going to be absolute. And that absolute will be based on its parent, which is this content wrapper we just did above that. Okay, so we're going to stop there and save this, see what damage we've done so far. Go back to our web page. We'll refresh our page. Scroll down to the bottom now, and now you will see that indeed this has now been taken out of the context of the page by adding the absolute positioning, but it's just floating on top of the adverts that we need to move as well. Something else of note here, why is this as wide as it is? Well, we set the position to absolute, didn't tell it how wide it was going to be, so it just made itself as wide as it needed to. basically as wide as the longest line, which is here on the bottom. So it made it long enough to hold that without having to break it, and it's perfectly happy there. But that's not where we want it. Again, we want it up on the side and much narrower than that. So now in the same pound sidebar rule, we're also going to add top 15 pixels. So that'll be 15 pixels down from the content wrapper. And we'll set the left to 0. Again, you saw the width thing, so we have to address that. And we'll set the width here to 170 pixels. So let's save that. Refresh our page again. And now we've got it more where we want it. First thing that I would note here is we probably want to drop it a little bit more off of the top. That's not quite enough. But everything else is underneath of this as well. So we're going to have to address that, but that is an easy fix with the margins for this main content section. Let's change this top from 15 to 25 to see if that gets us down far enough. Refresh it. And now we're right at it. The top of that in the news is right at the bottom of the menu with the black background there. So I'm going to add just a tad more to this. We're going to take this from 25 to 30 just so that there's a little gap in there. So now we got it, and you can see that it's dropped down just a tad more to give a little separation. So we got that position where we want it. We know we need to deal with this main content, but our other sidebar, the adverts, is still down here at the bottom of the page as well. Go back to our style sheet again. Our selector will be pound adverts, which is the ID of that section. And in here, again, position is going to be absolute. The top will use that same 30 pixels. That should get us in pretty much the same neck of the woods. We'll set the right to 25 pixels, and we'll set the width of this one at 125 pixels. It's not as wide as the other one. So we'll save this. Again, refresh our page. And now we've got them on both sides. So we've got our in the news on this side. We've got our adverts on this side. Since this is a little bit narrower, it's got a little bit more gap on this side. We're going to address some of these things now. But the top here looks about right. We got them both in the same place. About 5 pixels off of that menu. So the 30 pixels that we set the top at seems to be good. The only thing we really have left here is to deal with this main content. So let's go back to our style sheet. And up here above the main overlay, I'm just going to add a pound main as my selector for the rule. Then we want to do margin left, the left side of the page. We want to make sure that the main content clears that. The left side will be about 170 pixels. Same thing on the right, because we have a sidebar over there as well, so margin right. And this one we're going to set to about 135 pixels. We may have to adjust these a little bit, but we need to get that margin away from those paddings on either side, and we want to make sure we use the margin so it's consistent all the way down the page, even if the content is longer than the sidebars. We're also going to add some padding to the main content. Do it with the shortcut. We'll do 0 on top, 15 pixels on the right, 15 pixels on the bottom, and 20 pixels on the left. That padding is there because we're also going to add a border. We use the shortcut to get this started. It's going to be 1 pixel, solid, and in that very dark gray, which is pound 666. Now that's going to set the border all the way around. Correct my solid for solid. It's going to set the border all the way around at that 1 pixel. So the border on the top we really don't need. So we're going to do a border top. Set that to none. And same thing on the bottom. Border bottom. Set that to none. So if we save this and then look at it in our browser, do a refresh, boom. Now we've got everything off on it. Notice though we have a little bit of problem here. We've got border that's encroaching there, and the border is behind it. Okay, so we need to fix that. First thing on that main content, we'll try to get that border back over on the right hand side where it should be. Let's try 170 as well, so it's the same on both sides. Okay, so now we've got this border on the other side here as well, and it's right up here, so we should have had 170 on each. Now we need to deal with the very last thing, which is how are we going to deal with this, where that right and left border is obviously infringing on top of the nav in front of it. Well, there's one of two ways we can do this. One of those ways would be to add a margin top to the main section, the pound main, the ID main, and set that probably at, let's say, 22 pixels. Save it. Refresh our page, and that looks like that just about got it. Now you probably noticed when we did that, we also increased a little bit of space here as well. So if that's fine with you, then I would roll with that. The other way of doing this, though, is one that you probably wouldn't think of. And instead of having the margin top, we'll just X that out right now. So with that margin top X'd out, we could actually add the overflow property here. Set it to hidden. Save that. Go back to our page again. We'll refresh it one more time. And now you see that we no longer have that riding up. It's right at the top. It did not increase the space here. Talking in code here, we've managed to use all the different position types in this one page, all with the exception of the hit or the fixed. And you can see then as our page changes sizes, everything still stays in that same 3-column layout.